You no doubt have noticed that there are quite a few companies flooding the market with sub-$200 amplifiers lately. Brands like Fosi Audio, Aiyima, Arylic, just to name a few. They're all hoping to kind of entice you with that next diamond in the rough proposition. And while these amps can be great solutions in the right situations, more than ever, it's important to understand what we are really buying. Now, this video was originally going to be a review of Arylic's brand new B50 integrated amplifier. We've obviously been fans of Arylic in the past, and in order to give you the most well-rounded review of the B50, we made sure that we had a few of the hobby's latest must-buys on hand. In addition to the B50, we still have our Arylic A50, but we also picked up Fosi Audio's BT20A Pro and TB10D, and lastly, the Aiyima A08 Pro. Now, during our evaluation, we discovered some common themes across these types of amps that I was not expecting. Now, you've probably seen videos about amplifiers like the Arylic, Fosi, and Aiyima with claims that they can compete well and even surpass the performance of more traditional Class A, B, or D amps. I know we've even said the A50 can hold its own against some costlier competition. While one or two of these types of amps get close, not every amp is going to live up to the hype. Okay, before we get too enamored with the low price tag, it is important to know when and where these types of amps are going to work their best. Now, for most of you, amplifiers like these are going to be best suited for near-field listening. If you're unfamiliar with the term, listening in the near field means that you are physically sitting closer to your speakers. And this can be a desktop setting or in a smaller space, like say an office or a bedroom. Basically, any time where you are sitting closer than around 5 feet from your speakers. Now, to be clear, I have nothing against near-field listening. It's actually a great way to enjoy music, especially if you're tight on space. It may also save you a little bit and allow you to skip the need for complicated room treatments and room correction, because when you're sitting that close, room interactions are lessened because they happen outside of your listening window. And this can result in hearing things in the mix that may have gone unnoticed before. That said, listening in the near field may also lead you to attributing some of these previously unheard nuances to, say, your amp or a new DAC, when in fact it's possible the reason you're hearing these things is because you're just sitting closer to your speakers. Listening in the near field can also make it easier to enjoy listening at lower volumes. Amps with less power may feel as if they actually have more power than they do, or at the very least, better dynamic range. While it's not uncommon to listen at volumes of 75 dB or higher in a typical living room, 75 dB in the near field is loud and can cause damage to your hearing. So keep that in mind for cranking things to 11. So if you know that you're only going to listen in the near field, depending on your speakers, you may have nothing to be too concerned about long term with these types of, less expensive amplifiers. Just know that when you get these out in the proverbial open, you may discover some of their potential downsides. Now, one of the big selling points to a lot of these amplifiers, aside from the obvious price, is their seemingly endless power. I mean, who wouldn't love an amp that fits in the palm of your hand that costs less than $100 but puts out past lab levels of power? I mean, I'd sign up for that. But take a closer look at the manufacturer's own marketing materials and you will see that some of these figures come with a little bit of fine print. Take the Aiyima A08 Pro, for example. One of the more surprising things that I learned was that in order to achieve that amplifier's advertised power rating, I actually needed to buy a third-party power supply. Aiyima states that in order to get the maximum power of 300 watts, you need to buy a linear power supply that uses DC 48-volt current and is above 10 amps. Power supplies that meet this requirement retail for roughly the cost of the Aiyima itself, meaning you're not buying a $139 amp, you're buying a $240 one, but that lacks the features you would otherwise get when investing the same money in a traditional amp. Only now you have an even larger brick dangling from your Aiyima. But hey, you will have 300 watts and more power means better sound, right? Other notable clauses in the fine print may include that the power rating is valid only when running one channel, or that the max figure is more of a short-term thing rather than a sustained one. Now, in some cases, this is normal, but it's also a little misleading because these amps are often marketed based on their power out of the box. So what you're promised is not exactly what you're getting. Now, some of these amps, like the Arylic B50, aren't advertising ridiculously high power ratings for pennies on the dollar, though they may still be overstating their ratings just a bit. The B50's reported 50 watts should be enough to power most loudspeakers, even in a living room like ours. But after testing it and the other amps in our new room, we were faced with a new reality. We connected the Arylic to a pair of RP8000F Mark IIs, which, according to Klipsch, are 98 dB sensitive in room. So in theory, 50 watts should be more than enough to drive speakers like the new 8000s to their breaking point. After all, the A50 worked pretty well with our Heresy 4s back in Austin, though if you go back and watch that review, I noted some volume concerns. Fast forward to today in our new space and on the new 8000Fs with the B50's volume at 100%. The 8000Fs strain to even hit 85 dB. Compared to the equally affordable Cambridge Audio AXA25, which has a reported 25 watts of total Class AB power, the Cambridge drove the Klipsch well into the hundreds with far more composure and control. Which brings me to ask, what's going on? Well, it's possible the 8000Fs are just a little more challenging to drive than the Heresies, but it's also equally possible the added square footage of our new house is simply too much for the B50 to overcome, which is why we have a different experience today than we did, say, a few years ago. After all, an amplifier's job is to simply amplify the signal out to your loudspeaker. In theory, a good amp should impart little color or distortion to the signal, and a truly great amp definitely shouldn't. Yet you often hear these cheaper amplifiers described as being more articulate and detailed, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It may actually even be welcomed, but it also can mean that these amps are not totally neutral. While some of these amps claim to have ultra-low distortion or impressive signal-to-noise ratios, it would appear they are still capable of altering the signal, which was observable in basic tests like a frequency sweep. Using two different pairs of speakers, again, our Klipsch 8000F Mark IIs, as well as our Revel M16s, which I don't have to tell you are two speakers with radically different frequency responses, we measured them against some of our reference amps, and it didn't take long to discover a trend. Every single one of these ultra-affordable amps produced an altered frequency response that was different from our reference amplifiers, and all of them appear to have an upper mid-range and treble bias, some as high as plus 3 dB in spots. And as was the case with the Aiyima, it produced a different frequency response each time I measured it, giving me 3 different measurements of the same speaker within a span of less than 30 seconds. So maybe quality control isn't high on the list. I don't know, but your mileage is definitely going to vary. Now, what I can tell you is that when paired with brighter speakers, or even speakers that have more roll-off like the Revels, the potential for listener fatigue or worse is definitely possible. It also means that you might not be hearing the artist's intent because some of these amps appear to be altering the signal to some weird degree. And while some of you may comment, just use the tone controls, understand that this change in the signal may represent a deeper issue that tone controls won't fix. Now, to a degree, all of the amps we tested exhibited a high-pitched ringing or whine from our speakers' tweeters when at idle and even during playback. This was not speaker hiss, this was a high-frequency noise resulting in what I can only describe as distortion. Plosives, sibilance, or worse, ringing was audible at volumes greater than 60 dB through both the Klipsch and Revels. The fact that even KRISTI picked up on this, turning to me at one point and asking, "What is that? Do you hear that?" speaks volumes. And I'm not saying this to disparage her. Her listening skills are actually better than I sometimes give her credit for. Alas, her high-frequency hearing, according to her last test, does not go all the way up to 20 kilohertz. And yet, she was able to hear this high-pitched anomaly that was occurring. Now, this is where I have to take kind of a step back, and I have to keep my remarks in the subjective realm because I just don't have the proper equipment to further test the why or what may be causing this high frequency skew and resulting noise or distortion. Nevertheless, it is there, and this part is very important. It may represent a problem that could result in damage to your speakers over time, so buyer beware. Of all of the amplifiers we tested, the Arylic B50 and A50, Fosi Audio's BT20A Pro and TB10D, as well as the Aiyima A08 Pro, the Fosi BT20A Pro proved to be the better option of the bunch. While not perfect and definitely not neutral, at least not the one we bought, It was the closest in performance to that of the Cambridge AXA25 and other Class AB style amplifiers. All that said, and I am not saying this to be contradictory or incendiary, having now had this experience, I don't think that I would buy any of these products for myself. Sonics aside, with the exception of the Arylic B50, which at least has modern features like HDMI, a phono preamp, and more, none of these amps feel like that great of a value, especially when you can get the AXA25 for just over $200. But then again, I am no longer the ideal candidate for one of these types of amplifiers, so here is the best advice that I can offer to those of you who still may be considering one of these amps. If it were me, I would only buy one of these cheap amps if I knew I was only using it on a desktop or listening in the near field, meaning I'm not sitting more than 5, maybe 6 feet from my speakers. I would also not listen to any of these amps at volumes greater than, say, 60 dB. In other words, I would use them primarily for lower level or ambient listening. Lastly, I would only pair them with higher sensitivity speakers, but would be very careful about pairing them with speakers that have, a reputation for being bright. So no Klipsch, Sony, Sonus Faber, Focal, or B&W speakers, period. Unless, of course, you really like or need that brighter sound. If this channel has taught me anything, it's that you don't need to go broke to have fun. There are affordable products and deals to be had. You just have to know what it is you're buying and be honest about what type of listener you are. While the practically free price tag is certainly enticing, it has been for me in the past, using these types of products in the wrong situation or pairing them with the wrong speakers may end up costing you just a little bit more than you bargained for. All right, so that'll do it for me and this sort of kind of roundabout PSA about some of these cheaper amplifiers. But before we go, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little conflicted about this because I can totally see why or see how some people would end up buying these and liking them. I mean, just like we have in the past. Like
yes.
the Arylic has been something we have recommended for people tighter on the budget. If they're looking for something that's kind of in the vein of a Blue Sound Power Node, but they can't quite swing the, $800 or something that costs.
Yeah.
So I get it. I just, this particular evaluation, seeing all of the measurements and whatnot that you did really does put a spotlight on these type of amps that I didn't know needed to be sort of focused on or pointed out in the past. So
yeah, I
mean, I am feeling a little self-conscious about talking about these things now, when we have recommended the Arylic in the past. Like, I don't want it. I mean, obviously that's going to be the elephant in the room, but, after getting to hear these in, a single set sitting and on multiple speakers, especially in comparison with the Cambridge.
Yeah.
There's no way I wouldn't wait and save the extra $50 or whatever it's going to take in order to get the Cambridge amp.
Right.
And again, this is somebody coming from someone who has liked Arylic, but as soon as you hooked up the I believe, what is it? The AXA25.
Yes.
You immediately hear what is missing from all of these other little amps.
Yeah, I don't want to use, hyperbole like night and day, but there is a shift.
There is.
There's a shift.
And honestly, it doesn't really matter how far away you're sitting. I think you can hear it.
Yeah.
The other amps sound thin and weak by comparison.
Yeah.
There's very little control, and it's almost as if entire frequencies are missing.
Yeah.
But I think if you like that brighter sound, and you need something that does give you a little bit more articulation, say you do have some higher frequency hearing loss. Like for me, Andrew definitely has better hearing than me. I'm not saying that my hearing's bad, but there are times when something that is more articulate, it definitely helps me understand things like dialogue or whatever when we're watching TV. And so in those instances, I can totally see somebody getting something like this and being like, oh, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
If you are really using these to listen to music, I think the other frequencies, like the mid-range and the lower mid-range or bass, they're kind of gone.
Yeah.
And so but you know, at the end of the day, honestly, the real surprise for me is that the Cambridge is only like $200.
Yeah. It's $200 and it doesn't really suffer any of these issues. Now, there is more to the sound of an amplifier or the sound of a speaker than frequency response. Frequency response is just one way to kind of tell what's going on. There's a lot more to it than that. So I'm not claiming that the Cambridge AXA25 is the end-all be-all, and that if you spend $40 more and $209 or $219, whatever it was that it cost me to buy that amp, that you're in possession now of a truly, giant killer, $2,000 plus performing amplifier. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the AXA25 does not come with all of the caveats or the fine print. And in terms of just frequency response, which some of you may say, well, that's not a scientific, that's fine. That's fine. But it is a representation of something that I am hearing in our room. And it was repeatable. We could take multiple measurements and see that the Cambridge was similar in frequency response or the same in frequency response through both speakers as the Audiolab 7000A. Doesn't mean they sound the same, but it does mean that at a minimum, we're getting the same frequency measurement from both speakers using a $200 amp as we are a $1,700 one. We just can't say that about all of these other TI-based chip amps because they all were different. And as we said with the Aiyima, it was different every time we hit measure, which made it incredibly frustrating to try and judge that particular product because every time I demoed it subjectively, I kind of heard something different. And that is very unnerving. The Fosi Pro was the most like we say in the review, was the most like the Class AB amplifiers, although it seemed to be a little bit lean in that bass department, and this was observable in its frequency response of the same two speakers. It was down about a dB or so in those low bass frequencies. The Arylic, I still think that what Arylic is doing at $140 is remarkable in terms of feature set. I'm not quite sure how they do it, or it takes all of the wind out of higher priced product sales when they say, we can't possibly afford to give you HDMI. BS. So I still say kudos to Arylic for that. And like I said, if you're using it for near field, small room, or maybe just lower level listening, I still stand by my review of the A50. And I would say you can consider the B50.
Well, and also with respect to the B50 versus the A50, if you're set on getting one of these and you're looking at these two Arylic pieces, and I have no idea because I haven't looked, but let's say the A50 is cheaper, still get the B50 because
100%.
the binding posts are improved.
The B50 does not use a Phoenix connector. It uses binding posts. It is a slightly larger form factor.
It does look nicer.
It does look nicer. I mean, the black finish is incredibly hard to keep fingerprint free. I don't like that the volume knob just spins endlessly. There's no hard starts or stops. The remote is exactly the same. In fact, the A50 remote will run the B50. But the B50 is the, I don't want to say it's the superior product because actually sonically they measured exactly the same. But in terms of usability, I believe the B50 is improved. But I wholesale cannot recommend the Aiyima A08 Pro. The Fosi Pro, it doesn't have anything for features. I mean, it's basically just an amplifier with a volume control. So you're going to have to add on all the other stuff you may want. I think, and I'm not saying this to be, I'm not saying this to disparage anyone watching this video because I have been there. I do. I remember being in my early 20s and assembling systems purely based on cash on hand. Really like opening the proverbial wallet and being like, I have $400, but I want a complete system. and just building based on that. And 20 years later, I can say hand to heart that I get it, but that's not the way to go. And I'm not telling you like, you've got to spend money to get quality. You know that that's not what I'm about. But pairing a $100 thing with another $100 thing and then hoping it's better by chasing it with a $100 power supply, you just spent $300, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And while you may look and go, I got 3 things for $300 and $400 was always out of reach, saving a couple more months listening to earphones or your computer's laptop speakers for another month or two to get to $400, more often than not, will always be the better investment long term. That's it. That's our video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. A little bit different for us. It's always weird when you start out to try and review something and then realize that you're actually talking about a much bigger topic. So my question of the day is simply, how do you feel about these types of amplifiers? What has been your experience? Do you agree with us? How has it been different? I really do want to know. And I think that the discussion is important because the more information that we have, the better everyone is going to be. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that KRISTI left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you have continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. And both of us thank you all very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram, Recovering Audiophile. That's it. That's it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video.